Hi, I'm Sarah Louden, and my talk today is called Perfectly You, Embracing the Power of Being Real. Being invited to give this talk to you came with the title of the talk. I had to sit with it really to kind of think about ways that I wanted to present all of the elements of what being perfectly you could be. And what I decided was that I would tell you my version of perfectly you, embracing this power of being real through my experiences over the last 6, 7 years and what I have learned perfectly you actually means to me. So to do that, I've got to take you back about 7 years ago, where I was at the mall and a group of young girls were coming towards me, heads buried in their phones, and I sidestepped them so that they wouldn't come head on with me, and found myself in a position where I felt something pop. And I thought that was strange. I didn't feel kind of any pain or snap. It was just a pop in my foot. So I kept walking. It was the end of my trip anyway. I was walking towards my car, and I got to the car and I was in excruciating pain. I had really hurt myself. I drove straight to the urgent care center and they did an exam, scheduled me for an early morning MRI, and the MRI showed that I had torn my tibial tendon. A common situation, but common for people who are in competitive sports. So the doctor said, okay, we'll chalk it up to a freak accident and you have some PT, you stay in a walking boot for some weeks, and we'll evaluate at that point. Okay. At this time, going back to the title of the talk, Perfectly You, I was a new mom. My son was 7 months. I had an older son, 11 years old, and a stepdaughter. Married, my business was growing. I was, from a place of kind of professionalism, I was everywhere I wanted to be. And from a personal place, I had amazing friends. I had an incredible family. I was living my dream. I was living my perfect me. So, I just kind of went through with all that I needed to do and recovered from that injury, but was left with really bad sciatica that both the physical therapist and my primary care doctor determined was probably related to wearing the walking boot. That now I would just PT the sciatica and, that would be something that would go away relatively quickly. Well, it didn't go away quickly. And not only didn't it go away, but I started to experience a myriad of other symptoms that I couldn't really explain. I was fatigued. I would, at 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoons, I would need to unplug and lay down. I was very much focused on the fact that mundane things, doing the dishes, picking up after my son, grocery shopping and bringing the bags in, were not things that I could do with ease anymore. And I didn't understand why. At the same time, holding the baby and breastfeeding was getting very difficult because I couldn't hold him long enough. Or if he had fallen asleep on my chest, I found it very difficult to lay him into the crib. Picking him up and out of car seats, putting the car seats in and out of cars or on strollers became sometimes impossible for me. And I didn't know why. I went to the doctor a few times. He sent me to a few specialists, neurology, endocrinology. I even mentioned to my OBGYN whether or not, this might be normal for a woman who had her second baby in her mid-30s. And all the doctors just seemed to think that this was going to be kind of a passing thing, that I would go through this and, over time, get my strength back. So maybe about a year later, I woke up with a frozen shoulder. I did not do anything to kind of get it that way. I just couldn't move it. And I called the primary care doctor and I said, something happened to my shoulder. And he said, okay, come in, let's take a look. I did. He sent me for an MRI, and the MRI showed that I had a torn rotator cuff. Again, another common situation for people who play tennis or who lift weights or who injured themselves by lifting something too heavy, none of which were part of my life. And so again, physical therapy, lots of, ice and heat and care. And I was starting to feel like things weren't adding up. My pain was starting to prevent me from doing just daily function things at work, things at home. And I said, I really have to figure out what it is that's happening, because this isn't normal for me. So going back to the theme of this talk, Perfectly You, embracing the power of being real, I found myself during this time developing these coping mechanisms, not only coping with pain, but coping with feelings of inadequacy, feelings of not being capable to do the things that I felt that I was being called to do as part of my purpose, my mission in life. And it would eat at me to the point where I can't count the number of times I cried myself to sleep, the number of times in the shower I would just break down, the number of times when facing the staircase in my house, I would run to the garage and just let everything out. I couldn't come to terms with the fact that what I was able to do and what people expected me to do didn't line up. And for me, being someone who all my life tried and aimed to live up to other people's expectations, that was very hard. And it was causing mental breakdowns that I felt were, skirting along lines where I didn't recognize myself. So I then had this kind of pivotal moment. I was getting the boys into the car, getting my big son off to school, and I couldn't sit down in the car. I felt like a stranger in my own body. I called the doctor. I scheduled a visit with the orthopedic surgeon. The first questions the orthopedic surgeon asked me kind of threw me off. He said, do you skateboard? Do you horseback ride? Have you fallen? Have you taken a significant fall? He even asked me whether or not I took pain medication for any other reason. And when all of these things kind of came back clear, no, he took some x-rays and came back into the room and said, it seems you broke your tailbone. I said, Doc, how is it possible that I broke my tailbone? And he said, you must have fallen and you forgot. In that moment, I need to say, I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to scream out loud at the past years that I felt like no one was listening to me. I wanted to just scream at myself for being so broken, so fragile. And I want to pause here to go back to the theme of this talk, perfectly you, embracing the power of being real, and say, article after article shows that women have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. The implications of the shifts that have happened in the home, at work, even in the way we socialize, the way we depend on each other, all disproportionately fall on women to carry the lion's share. And we do so because we're fixers, we're problem solvers, we're caregivers. We want our family to be safe. We want our family to feel protected. And we want to be the one to be the heroine of our story. And sometimes things don't work out that way. Sometimes you just want to walk into a room and someone say something to you and you just want to scream. You want to scream, do you see me? Do you understand what I'm bearing? Do you understand what it took for me to be able to show up today and give of myself? And so many times we don't. We just kind of cover that all up and get to the point where we're in survival mode. And it's not fair to us. It's not fair to our spirit, to our heart. It's not fair to the people around us who have given the opportunity to share the burden. They would. But for so many of us, it's so foreign to ask for that help or to admit those vulnerabilities. And that's where I was. And so back in that orthopedics office, I felt this overwhelming sense of hopelessness. No one is ever going to find out what's wrong with me, and this is how I'm going to live the rest of my life. And it was not a reality that I was willing to accept. So I knew that I had to change the way I was seeking help. I started to share my situation with colleagues and friends. I then found myself very quickly discovering new ways to approach pain and fatigue. And I, about a year and a half later, found myself in a rheumatologist's office. And I remember hearing her say, "I have a diagnosis for you." I remember feeling this sense of being seen. I don't know how else to explain it. It was, working in oncology pretty much my whole professional life. Nobody wants the diagnosis. Nobody wants the diagnosis. It's hard to give and it's hard to receive. In this case, when she named it, I felt so grateful. She said it was chronic, it was widespread, it was progressive, it was degenerative, it could be aggressive, and she said it needed significant treatment. And she started with infusions and injections. And I thought, now that I have an answer, I can button it all back up. I can get to a place where I'm perfectly me again, where all the things that define me as strong, as capable, as wise, all of those things could be returned to me. And I ignored so much of what was happening to my body in favor of putting on this show. And what eventually happened was my body rejected the medicine and went into a significant flare that landed me in the emergency room and admitted for nearly a week, managing huge abscesses in my mouth and my throat. And what's so ironic about that is I talk for a living. I really talk for a living. I'm in medical education, I'm in advocacy. I understand what it means to have a platform and to use your voice. And ironically, that's where my body decided to close up, to shut down. For days, I couldn't speak. And in those times, I realized that two things. I didn't want to go on living this way. I couldn't. And in order for anything to change, it needed to radically change. So again, I pause to say we encounter these pivotal moments in our life. Sometimes we're shoved into those moments. Sometimes it's an awakening based on a shared experience. Sometimes we get this sense of revelation that things need to change. But no matter how we get there, the process is typically similar. It's this acknowledgement of where you are disconnected from where you want to be. And that's where I was. And I felt very much as though in order to get to where I wanted to go, there needed to be a recognition that that place might not be aligned with what I defined as perfect. I hope that makes sense. That the story that I wrote about how my life would go might not be the story that I lived about how my life would go. And for me, that was big, because what was I if I wasn't strong and able? What could I be to the people who I love if I wasn't able to carry so much on my own shoulders? So in that hospital room, I made a decision that I know isn't available to a lot of people. And that decision was to check myself into a months-long health retreat. What I was able to do at that retreat was to strip away all that I had collected to hide what was happening. I had the opportunity to lay down the facade, to break open the opportunity to speak a new and vulnerable truth. It required me stepping away from my roles and responsibilities that I felt defined me, and instead wholly focus on who I was, where I was going, and how I was going to get there. And for me, thinking about this talk, Perfectly You, embracing the power of being real, perfectly you doesn't mean you're perfect. And embracing the power of being real means that the reality doesn't necessarily have to match the painting, the perfection. We have gotten so caught up in looking our best, being our best, showing the world who we are, marching for our rights, being the women that never say no, that always can do, and that relentlessly pursue what we believe is empowered, what we believe is powerful. And what I discovered in this journey is that I was most powerful when I was at my weakest, was when I was able to ask others for help. And I hope that this talk, while it may not represent what you thought was perfectly you, I hope that what it did was give you the opportunity to think of your life through a different lens and to give yourself room, love, forgiveness, and opportunity to picture what a perfect you looks like and what using your real, vulnerable, transparent, authentic voice feels like. Because I have to tell you, I'm so grateful for my disease. I'm so grateful for all the things that it has permitted me to do, all the avenues it's ushered me into. And I, every day, look for opportunities to share. Thank you so much.